Greetings, YouTubers! I'm Dan, and welcome back to the 80's Emporium's episode on Swords and Sorcery of the 1980s. If you haven't seen part 1 of this video, be sure to check that out as well. Let's get back into it.
Krull.
At $47 million, 1983's Krull was one of the most expensive movies of the early 80s. But the budget was put to good use. The sets, special effects, cinematography, and music are superior to most other fantasy films of the 80s. It was directed by Peter Yates, who had gained notoriety for 1968's Bullet. The film was a bit of a mixture of 1981's Excalibur and 1977's Star Wars, but Krull failed to replicate the success of either. If you watch it, look closely, and you might find early appearances of Liam Neeson and Robbie Coltrane.
Deathstalker.
Not to be confused with Dragon Slayer or Beastmaster, next up was Deathstalker, one of the few S&S films to successfully launch a film series, despite it being one of the decade's worst rated. The fairly obvious Conan the Barbarian ripoff abandoned exciting plots and complex characters for sex and violence. Produced by famous low-budget movie producer Roger Corman, most of the action and dialogue was improvised on the set of the film. In addition to 3 more Deathstalker movies, Corman produced a large number of additional sword and sorcery films over the decade.
Conan the Destroyer.
Arnold Schwarzenegger returned to the role of Conan 2 years after the original, but Conan the Destroyer was more comedic in tone and family-friendly than the original, a fact that didn't sit well with Schwarzenegger. This was one of the many reasons that a third Conan film never got off the ground. However, in 2019, Schwarzenegger announced that a new Conan movie was in development.
Red Sonja.
After 5 years of mostly male-led sword and sorcery movies, Red Sonja flipped the script with Brigitte Nielsen in her acting debut as the titular female warrior. Joining Red Sonja on her quest was a character played by Arnold Schwarzenegger. Coincidence? Not exactly. Actually, this movie was originally intended to be the third Conan film. But due to financial and legal constraints, producer Dino De Laurentiis was able to save his script by making Red Sonja the star and turning Arnold's role into a supporting character with a different name.
Who are you, anyway?
My name is Kalidor.
Unfortunately, the mediocre film was a failure.
Masters of the Universe.
He-Man and the Masters of the Universe was a 1983 animated TV program that became one of the most popular shows of the decade. A live-action film was released in 1987, starring Dolph Lundgren as the muscular hero, fresh off his breakthrough role in Rocky IV. The film, however, was a commercial and critical failure. Lundgren, who went on to a successful career with nearly 100 projects, has said that this film is still his least favorite.
Willow.
One of the final sword and sorcery entries of the 1980s was the Ron Howard-directed Willow, a fantasy drama created by George Lucas as a vehicle for Warwick Davis, who he had worked with on Return of the Jedi. Like Dragon Slayer before it, the effects were done by Industrial Light and Magic, who debuted their groundbreaking morphing effect with this film. The film was successful and nominated for 2 Technical Academy Awards. For our final film, here's a story that provides a unique perspective on the popularity of the swords and sorcery genre in the 1980s. As we discussed earlier, one of the factors that contributed to the rise in the genre was the fast-growing popularity of the role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons. But not everyone was a fan of America's newest pastime. Many believed the game to be dangerous, promoting Satanism, witchcraft, and even murder. The TV movie Mazes and Monsters, based on the book of the same name, looked to play off those fears by telling the story of a group of college students whose lives are upended by a similar role-playing game. The film was the first leading role for a young actor named Tom Hanks. As the 80s drew to a close, roughly 37 sword and sorcery films had come and gone on the big screen, and interest in the genre began to fade. Audiences grew tired of low-budget productions, repetitive plots, and decreasing quality. The genre mostly remained dormant over the next 2 decades, with the exception of the highly celebrated Lord of the Rings trilogy, which avoided the overused 80s tropes such as nudity and hyperviolence. And then came 2011, when HBO released its first episode of Game of Thrones, a series which took the world by storm. It was a cultural phenomenon and a huge hit for HBO. A reboot of Conan and a live-action Hobbit trilogy soon followed. Meanwhile, a number of other studios began to create their own sword and sorcery series, such as The Witcher, Shadow and Bone, and Wheel of Time. HBO recently launched the first season of Game of Thrones spin-off House of the Dragon. Disney Plus created a sequel series to Willow, and Amazon spent an estimated $1 billion on their 2022 series The Rings of Power, set in the Middle-earth universe. A Dungeons & Dragons film hit theaters in spring 2023, and Warner Brothers recently announced that they are working on creating more projects in the Lord of the Rings universe. It certainly seems like we may be witnessing the long-awaited return of the sword and sorcery genre. Would we have gotten HBO's Game of Thrones without Dragon Slayer? The Northman without Conan the Barbarian? Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings without Hawk the Slayer? We may never know for sure. But the short-lived SNS boom in the 80s did indirectly change the film industry as we know it. Industrial Light and Magic is now one of the most highly respected special effects houses in the world. It gave actors such as Helen Mirren and Liam Neeson their starts. And of course, it launched Arnold Schwarzenegger from Mr. Universe to a household name. And his superstar caliber film career continues to this day. Do you remember any of these movies? Which was your favorite? Did you ask your parents to buy you that 3-bladed sword? Comment below. Be sure to subscribe and stay tuned to this channel for more videos. Use the comments section to let us know what you want to see next. Thanks for watching, and may Crom be with you.
Well, how about a little help? Come on. You two got me into this, now get me out. Thanks.